parents called and told me to cancel my wedding next week and rush to them as there's an emergency. I rushed back only to find out the emergency was that my golden child sister wants me to leave my fiance, and he was her crush in high school. So I canceled the venue and booked even a bigger one and uninvited them. Hi guys, I have done something that has caused everyone in my family to call me and tell me how much of an a-hole I am. But I need to ask you, so this is my story. I, Gwen, 27 female, have always been the second to my parents' golden child. My older sister Rebekka, 32 female. Rebekka is what you would call to be a type A controlling, intelligent, and socially awkward kid. Now before I tell you about the incident that brought me to Reddit, I want to give you a picture of just how much a golden child Rebekka is. It'll help you understand the whole situation, trust me. She was the kind of kid teachers adored. Straight A's her whole life without ever breaking a sweat. She'd ace a test, then stay after to tutor the kids who were struggling. It was like she was born to achieve. Rebekka wasn't just about brains either. She was student council president and captain of the math team, and even managed to star in all the school plays somehow. Our house was basically a shrine to her accomplishments. Certificates, trophies, medals, you name it. They even framed her first report card with all perfect scores. And my parents, well, they beamed with pride. You couldn't walk 5 feet in our house without seeing a picture of Rebekka winning some award or another. Even the fridge was covered with honor roll stickers and newspaper clippings about her latest debate victory. It was clear who the favorite child was. However, even with everything, Rebekka didn't have a lot of friends or any boyfriend in high school. She was well liked, but it seemed like she had trouble making long-lasting friendships or relationships. I remember one time, she spent weeks planning this elaborate birthday party for one of the girls on the debate team. She'd ordered this fancy custom cake, themed decorations, and even little goodie bags for everyone. But then, on the day of the party, hardly anyone showed up. Rebekka was so crushed, and honestly, I felt terrible for her. There were other times too, like when a group of us would be hanging out and Rebekka would start going on and on about some obscure historical topic or launch into a complex math problems just for fun. It wasn't that she was trying to be weird, she just struggled to connect with people on their level. I mean, who wants to talk about the intricacies of the Napoleonic Wars at a sleepover? And then there was the whole boyfriend situation. Rebekka had this massive crush on someone for like 2 years. He was not interested in her, but she was convinced that he was her soulmate. She'd write him these long, super emotional poems and slip them into his locker. He never even acknowledged them. It was heartbreaking to watch. I honestly think she just intimidated people. She was so smart and intense that most kids, especially guys her age, didn't know how to handle her. I feel bad for her, even if it did make her family dynamic a little unbalanced. But still, I will admit that I was a bit jealous of Rebekka. I was an average student, average at studying, average at sports, and everything else, except language. I always loved reading books, and I was good at writing stories and poems as well. I was on the school editorial team, in fact. That was my little niche, the creative, slightly offbeat one. I got decent grades in English and sometimes did okay in history if the topic interested me. But subjects like math and science, total disasters. Don't get me wrong, I tried, I really did. But I would sit down to study, stare at a textbook, and my mind would wander off. I would doodle in the margins, write silly line bricks instead of notes, anything to avoid boredom. Rebekka could memorize formulas and dates like it was nothing. Me, I would be lucky to remember my own locker combination half the time. Athletics wasn't my strong suit either. I was always the last one picked for the teams in gym class. Let's just say coordination was not my gift. But words, those I could work with. I loved the way they flowed together. The way you could paint a whole picture in someone's mind with just a few well-chosen sentences. My teachers always encouraged me, especially my creative writing teacher, Mrs. Davis. She would tell me I had a real talent, which, to be honest, made all the failed math quizzes a little easier to bear. While Rebekka and I weren't very close, we had an understanding. We used to fight, like siblings do, but once she went to college, she started to talk to me even less, and once I went to college, we drifted apart even more. We only met during family events and holidays, sometimes even not then. Even when we were in the same place, we were practically strangers. It felt weird at first, honestly, like we'd grown up under the same roof, but now it was like we barely knew each other. We would exchange awkward small talk. How's school? What are you up to these days? That kind of thing. But any real conversation, forget it. Rebekka was so focused on her career path, getting a doctorate in something super complicated like biophysics, that it was like she lived on another planet. Sometimes I would try to bring up old memories, just to see if it sparked anything. Like that time we snuck out to see a midnight movie, or when we built that ridiculous fort in the living room. She would give this polite smile, like she was humoring a distant relative, and then change the subject back to her research or some important conference she was attending. It wasn't that she was being mean intentionally. Rebekka just didn't seem to have the time or energy for a real sibling bond anymore. She was all about her work and her achievements, and I guess I just didn't fit into that picture. After I graduated from college, I was lucky enough to immediately get a job, and that's when I met my now husband Ron, 32 male. Surprisingly, Ron was a senior in my high school, but we never knew each other then. Since he was a senior at work as well, but in a different team, I would often go to him for help. Soon, we started dating. Ron was the complete opposite of Rebekka. He was laid back, easygoing, and always up for a good time. He had this goofy sense of humor that could make me laugh even on my worst days. Best of all, he didn't care that I wasn't an overachiever like my sister. He liked me for me, the messy, sometimes irresponsible, but fun Gwen. We fell for each other pretty quickly. Our dates were nothing fancy. Pizza nights, movie marathons, long walks where we'd talk about everything and nothing. It was simple, but it was perfect. After a year of dating, we moved in together. Our little apartment was a total mess most of the time, but it was our mess, and we loved it. I introduced Ron to my family, and surprisingly, everyone loved him. Well, everyone except Rebekka. She was even weirder around him. She would never talk to him. She wouldn't even stay in the same room as him. I tried talking to her about it, but she always just said that I was overthinking and there was no issue. It wasn't even like she was being rude, more like avoidant. If Ron walked into the room, she would suddenly find a reason to leave. At family dinners, she would sit as far away from him as possible and focus entirely on her food. It was obvious she was uncomfortable, but why? Ron was the nicest guy in the world, easy to talk to, and genuinely liked my family. I started getting a little paranoid, to be honest. Was it something he'd said or done? Maybe he accidentally offended her without even realizing it. I tried asking Ron if he'd noticed anything, but he was just as clueless as I was. Rebekka's behavior was so strange, and it was starting to create this weird tension at family gatherings. Then it got even weirder. One time, we were over at my parents' house for a barbecue, and I saw Rebekka and Ron accidentally bump into each other in the kitchen. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but I saw Rebekka flinch like she'd been burned or something. It was a tiny movement, but I saw it. That's when I started to wonder if there was something more going on, something I didn't know about. Last year, Ron proposed to me. It wasn't anything super fancy, just a quiet, intimate moment at home. He'd cooked my favorite dinner, candles were lit, the whole deal. He got down on one knee and said all these sweet things about how I was the best part of his life and how he wanted to spend forever with me. Of course I said yes. Well, after I managed to stop crying happy tears, that is. I told my parents and everyone was happy. Even Rebekka congratulated me. I even asked her to be one of my bridesmaids. I knew that Rebekka didn't have any friends, so I wanted to make sure that I made her feel included in everything. To my surprise, she seemed genuinely happy for me and even agreed to be a bridesmaid. It was a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could finally start rebuilding our relationship. Things were good for a while. We started planning the wedding. I went all in on Pinterest boards, dress shopping, the whole 9 yards. Ron and I were so excited to start this new chapter. It seemed like the perfect time in our lives. Everything fallen into place. I didn't want a big wedding, even though my parents were insisting on it. I had a specific vision of what I wanted my wedding to be. Something small, intimate, just our closest friends and family. Think fairy lights, rustic decor, and an outdoor ceremony under the stars. Ron didn't have any specific demands, except that he wanted a live band instead of a DJ. He had this thing about how a good band just brings the party to life. Honestly, it was kind of cute how excited he was about that. We spent hours scouring YouTube for bands, debating the merits of classic rock versus swing. The rest of the planning was a whirlwind. Finding the perfect dress was stressful, but also kind of exhilarating. My mom and Rebekka even came with me for the final fitting, which was, well, let's just say it was an experience. But hey, at least they were not arguing, right? Choosing the venue was another adventure. We finally settled on this beautiful old farmhouse that had been converted into an event space. It had a huge garden, perfect for the outdoor ceremony, and this cozy rustic barn for the reception. It just felt right. With every decision I made and every detail that fell into place, I got more and more excited. This was our day, the start of our forever. Little did I know, everything was about to fall apart in the most spectacular way possible. Last week, I got a call from my parents. It was the middle of the workday, and my mom's voice sounded strained, almost panicked. "Gwen, honey, you need to cancel your wedding. There's been an emergency." My heart dropped. "Cancel my wedding? What are you talking about? What emergency?" I demanded, my voice rising an octave. "Sweetheart, we can't explain over the phone," my dad interjected, his tone usually calm but now laced with tension. "Just come home, now." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in shock. Cancel my wedding? Why? 1,000 horrible scenarios raced through my mind. Was someone sick? Had there been an accident? I tried calling back, but both my parents' phones went straight to voicemail. I left work in a daze, barely explaining to my manager that there was a family emergency. The entire drive home was a blur of panic and confusion. Was Ron okay? My mind jumped to the worst possible conclusions. Car accidents, sudden illnesses. My stomach churned with every mile. What could have happened that was so urgent that I had to cancel my entire wedding? The wedding I'd spent months planning. The day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life. Tears pricked my eyes, but I forced them back. I needed to be strong, to be there for my family, whatever this was. When I reached home, my parents and my sister were sitting in the living room. An air of tense silence hung over the room. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I sat down on the couch, my hands twisting nervously in my lap. "Gwen," my mom started, her voice hesitant. "We need to talk about something important." "Is everything okay? I got so worried when you said it was an emergency," I blurted out, unable to contain my anxiety any longer. My parents exchanged a glance, and my dad cleared his throat. "Look, honey, we know this is a lot to take in, but you need to cancel the wedding." My heart sank. Cancel the wedding? My mind reeled. "Why? What are you talking about?" My mom reached out and took my hand. "Sweetheart, you have to leave Ron." I gaped at her. "Leave Ron? Was this some kind of sick joke?" "What the hell are you guys talking about?" It was my dad who spoke next, his voice low and serious. "Rebekka, she had a huge crush on Ron in high school. That's why you need to leave him." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Rebekka, a crush on Ron. It sounded so ridiculous that I almost laughed. Rebekka never told me about this, and even if she did have some teenage crush, so what? He wasn't her boyfriend, he's mine. As it turns out, Ron was the guy Rebekka was obsessed with in high school, the one I told you guys about who she used to write those cringy poems for. But the kicker, Ron never mentioned a word of it to me. Not when we met, not when we started dating, not ever. Rebekka, in one of her rare bursts of openness, spilled the whole story. How she'd pine after him from afar. How she'd felt crushed when he never seemed to notice her. "It's always been hard, seeing you with him, Gwen," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. "I try to be happy for you, I really did. But if you marry him, I can't pretend anymore. I won't come home for the holidays. I won't see you at all." My anger flared. "This is ridiculous, Rebekka. You're what, 32 years old? Time to grow up and get over a silly high school crush." That's when my parents launched into their well-rehearsed speech about how they don't want Rebekka to feel alienated from her own family and how they just want everyone to be happy. Then, in a tone that sent chills down my spine, my mom said, "Honey, you're young. You'll find someone else." Someone else? Like love was a pair of shoes you could just swap out whenever you felt like it. The sheer unfairness of it all made my head spin. My own parents choosing my awkward, emotionally stunned sister over me. Choosing her ridiculous fantasy over my real-life happiness. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "You know what?" I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not doing this. You can choose her drama, her ultimatums, whatever. I'm done with all of you." I went back home, my legs barely carrying me through the door. The apartment felt hollow, a cruel reminder of the future I thought I had. As soon as Ron got back from work, I collapsed into his arms and poured out the whole insane story. He listened in stunned silence, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "Rebekka? The same Rebekka who barely says 2 words to me?" "Yeah," I choked out. "Apparently she was obsessed with you in high school. The poems, the weird avoidance. It all makes sense now." Ron shook his head, a wry smile twisting his lips. "Well, let me tell you, those letters were something else. Super intense, like she was writing to her soulmate or something. It honestly freaked me out a bit. I never even replied. I figured whoever it was would get the hint." He held me tighter. "She never mentioned this? Not once?" "Nope. And now she expects me to throw away my life, my relationship, just because she had some teenage crush that went nowhere?" I felt a fresh surge of anger just thinking about it. Ron kissed the top of my head, his voice low and soothing. "This is crazy, Gwen. You know I love you, right? And that I am not going anywhere." I managed a shaky nod, burying my face in his shirt. It was the only bit of sanity left in this whole mess. I didn't want them at my wedding, not after the way they treated me, threatened me, tried to make me feel guilty for my own happiness. The anger burned hot in my chest. Besides, who knew what kind of scene Rebekka might cause if she showed up? No, it was better this way. But the invitations were already out. My family knew the date and location. There had to be a plan. The first call I made was to every major wedding venue in the city. Surely one of them would have an opening, even with such a short notice. Despair began to gnaw at me as venue after venue told me they were fully booked. Then, like a miracle, a cancellation. A beautiful, sprawling hotel ballroom was suddenly available, and the manager even offered me a discount due to the last-minute scramble. With the new and significantly larger venue secured, I canceled my original booking. Next came the task of notifying everyone about the change. Swiftly and methodically, I updated my vendors, giving them the new address. Then the guest list. One by one, I called each person, explaining there had been a change of venue due to unforeseen circumstances. The day of my wedding finally arrived. Despite everything, a sense of giddy anticipation filled me as I got ready. My bridesmaids fussed around me, their laughter chasing away the last lingering shadows of doubt. The dress, the makeup, the flowers, everything fell into place, a testament to the amazing friends who'd rallied around me during this craziness. The ceremony was a whirlwind of happy tears, heartfelt vows, and the undeniable warmth of love surrounding Ron and me. With the bigger venue, we ended up spending a bit more than planned, but seeing the joyful faces of our guests made every penny worth it. The reception was a blast. The band Ron insisted on. They were phenomenal, keeping the dance floor packed all night. Speeches flowed, toasts were raised, and an impromptu conga line even broke out at one point. It was the kind of unfiltered joy I dreamed of. While I was getting ready, my parents must have shown up at the old venue and found out that there was no wedding. They called me and I picked up. "I've switched venues," I informed them flatly, "and you're not invited anymore." Silence crackled on the other end of the line. Then came my dad's shocked sputter and my mom's shocked sob. I ignored them both. "If you show up, I have given pictures of all of you to security. You won't be allowed in. So if you don't want a scene, a public humiliation," I let the threat hang in the air. "Then stay home." I ended the call abruptly, handing the phone to my best friend and maid of honor. "Here," I said, my voice thick. "You deal with this. I can't." But late into the evening, curiosity got the better of me. I took a peek. There were angry messages, accusations, a few desperate pleas, and somewhere underneath it all, a tinge of sadness I couldn't entirely dismiss. In one particularly long text, my mom had written, "We just want what's best for both our girls." It took all my willpower to not type back. "Then why are you making me choose?" Instead, I deleted them all, locked my phone, and went back to my party. There would be time for the fallout later. Tonight, I was going to dance with my husband, laugh with my friends, and focus on building the life I deserved. However, a few distant relatives, summoned by my panicked parents, approached me during the reception. "Sweetheart, whatever the issue is, you should never have uninvited your parents to your own wedding." One unclogged, shaking her head. "Family is everything." Others echoed the sentiment. The weight of their words, the tradition ingrained in them, chipped away at my resolve. Seeing Ron give his dad a heartfelt hug after the toast stirred up something ugly in me. A pang of envy, a longing for that kind of unconditional love that I seemed to lack. My own walk down the aisle, with my best friend's dad standing in as a substitute, had been bittersweet. Now the guilt gnawed at me. Should I have just sucked it up for one day, smiled through gritted teeth, pretended everything was okay, for the sake of appearances, for the sake of those perfect wedding photos? So, I am asking you guys, as a third party, am I the a-hole for uninviting my parents from my wedding after they told me to break up with my fiance because my sister had a crush on him in high school? Hi guys, thank you for all the support and kind comments. I have an update for all of you. So after the wedding was over, Ron and I finally headed home, exhausted but exhilarated. We'd fantasized about this moment, our first steps into our apartment as husband and wife. A quiet, private celebration of our new life together. Instead, guess who was waiting on our doorstep? My parents. Yep, I stifled a sigh and invited them in. My attempt at a romantic homecoming officially thwarted. My mom immediately launched into a familiar refrain. How disappointed they were, how I'd crossed the line, blah blah blah. It was enough to make my eye twitch. Cross the line? I couldn't help but snap back. Really? You're the ones who told me to leave my fiance a week before the wedding. That's not crossing a line. My dad jumped in, trying to play the voice of reason. Gwen, we know we shouldn't have said that, but Rebekka was so distraught. We just want everyone to be happy. A bitter laugh escaped me. Happy? At my expense? Well, congratulations, you managed to make exactly 0 people happy. I motioned towards Ron, who stood beside me, his expression a mix of anger and bewilderment. I chose him, Dad. I chose my own happiness. Maybe it's time you accepted that Rebekka isn't the center of the universe. The silence that followed was heavy. My parents looked stunned, like I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Finally, my mom spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "But she's your sister, and I love her," I said firmly. "But I'm not going to sacrifice my life for her. Not anymore." I started crying. The hurt and frustration I'd been holding in for so long bubbled to the surface, spilling out in choked sobs. Why, I cried, looking at them through tear-blurred eyes. Why don't you love me like your own daughter? Is it always going to be about Rebekka? Their answers were a jumble of excuses and contradictions. Rebekka had never treated them this way, they insisted. They were simply trying to give me a chance to make things right. When it became clear I wasn't going to apologize, wasn't going to call back to them, their tone shifted. With a coldness that cut deeper than their anger, they delivered their final blow. They were disowning me. I was no longer their daughter, banned from contacting them or Rebekka ever again. The words echoed in the room, a death sentence to the childhood I never really had. Through my tears, I saw Ron step forward. "You've said enough." His voice was low and dangerous. "It's time for you to leave." Surprisingly, they turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing me off from the family I'd grown up in. I collapsed into Ron's arms, my body shaking with sobs. He held me and murmured soothing words that did little to ease the gaping hole in my chest. The next few days were a blur of conflicting emotions. The joy of being newly married, the anticipation of our honeymoon, a weekend getaway to a cozy cabin in the woods, warred with a lingering sense of unease. The wounds inflicted by my parents were still raw, their words echoing, even in moments of happiness. But Ron was my rock. He never pushed me to talk if I didn't feel like it. Simply offered a comforting presence, a warm hug, and a goofy joke to break the tension. He took care of all the practicalities, packing for our trip, double-checking our reservations, and reminding me to bring sunscreen with an exaggerated wink. It was his way of showing me that I wasn't alone. Our honeymoon was everything I needed it to be. We hiked trails ablaze with autumn colors, curled up by a crackling fire with mugs of hot cider, and laughed until our sides ached at his terrible attempts to cook fancy omelets. Being away from it all, from the drama and heartache, let me breathe again. Even now, back in our apartment, with the normalcy of everyday life settling around us, I carry a sense of gratitude for Ron. He saw me at my worst and stood by me when my world crumbled, and he loved me through it all. Hi guys, I know it's been a month, but things have been quiet until yesterday. That's when I got a frantic call from my mother. Rebekka was sick, she said, and needed to talk to me urgently. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Anger still burned hot, but worry flickered too. She was my sister after all. When I arrived at my parents' house, the weight of unspoken tension hung in the air. My mom ushered me aside. Rebekka had apparently moved back in during the week, and things had gone downhill quickly. She described a scene of despair. Rebekka locked in her room, crying, refusing to eat, fixated on how I had ruined her life by going ahead with the wedding. My mom, her voice laced with desperation, begged me to talk to her, to apologize, to do whatever it took to make things right. I have nothing to apologize for, I insisted. But despite my anger, a pang of guilt pricked at me. Was I really so heartless that I could ignore my sister's suffering? With a sigh of resignation, I climbed the stairs to Rebekka's room. The door was shut tight, and I hesitated for a moment before gently knocking. "Rebekka, it's Gwen," I called softly. "Can I come in?" I didn't hear anything, so I pushed the door open. Right away, she was in a very aggressive mode, not at all what I was expecting. She glared at me from her tear-streaked face. "You have some nerve, waltzing in here after what you've done." I tried to reason with her. "I did nothing wrong, Rebekka. I came because I heard you weren't doing well. I still worry about you." Her laugh was harsh, mocking. "Nice try. You don't care about me. All you care about is yourself and your perfect little wedding." The way she twisted my joy into something selfish stung. "It was my wedding," I retorted. "I have a right to be happy." "Happy," she hissed. "At my expense? You knew how I felt, and you trampled all over me. Some sister you turned out to be." The guilt I had battled for weeks surged back, fueled by her accusation. "I didn't ask for this, Rebekka. I never asked for you to have some weird crush on Ron in high school," she said, "and I didn't ask for my sister to marry the only guy I've ever cared about." The unfairness of it all slammed into me. "Cared about? You never even spoke to him. It was a teenage fantasy, Rebekka. He was a real person to me, a man I love." "Oh, so I'm the crazy one," she practically sneered. "And you're the perfect innocent victim. Always have been, haven't you?" That's when I snapped. I felt like she was twisting the knife on purpose, refusing to see me, my hurt, anything beyond her own pain. "You know what, Rebekka? I came here out of concern, but I'm done. Do you want to stay hurt and miserable? Go ahead, but don't blame me for your choices." I stormed out, slamming the door behind me, and I left the house. I don't know what the future holds. I honestly don't think this situation is ever going to resolve itself. Hi everyone, it's been a week since my last update, and I have one final chapter to this whole saga. The day after I posted, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was ice cold. I was to come and retrieve all my childhood belongings from the basement. They were officially disowning me and wanted no trace of my existence left in their house. If I didn't pick up my things, they would be thrown out with the trash. I didn't have the energy to fight anymore. Yesterday, Ron and I borrowed a pickup truck from one of his friends and drove to my parents' house. Everything was already packed into boxes and stacked neatly by the back door. They said nothing to me, barely even acknowledged my presence. A silent message, clear as day: "You're dead to us." We left as quickly as possible. The weight of that final goodbye settling over us like a shroud. My parents have completely shut me out. It hurts like hell, but in a twisted way. There's also a silver of grim relief. They can't disappoint me anymore. Can't dangle the hope of reconciliation only to snatch it away. I know I'll carry the scars of this for a long time, maybe forever, but I have Ron. He's my family now. Together, we'll create a new kind of belonging, built on love and unwavering support. Thank you everyone for your kind messages. And that was a wrap up for today's story. Thank you very much for listening. Smash that like button for me and subscribe for more stories. Thanks again, and we'll be seeing you in the next one.